Passion. All right, everyone. So welcome to Startup now, and I'd like to play a quick video here. Those are the startup grind values that we like to share with everyone. Oh, I didn't mean to share them a second time. All right.
It just helps bring the message home.
Exactly. So you're here today with Startup Grind Kansas City. My name is Carolyn Santos, and I'm the chapter director. And our conversation today is with InnovateHER KC, Lauren Conaway, founder and CEO. And we're just going to have an open dialogue, interaction, conversation with Lauren. And so please feel free to use the chat and ask questions and engage with not only yourselves. Tell us where you're dialing in from, and but with Lauren and myself. So InnovateHER KC is a community that connects, empowers, and supports women leaders. They unite women leaders to accomplish incredible things. And our guest this afternoon is Lauren Conaway, the CEO and founder. And Lauren, I'm just really happy to have you with us this afternoon. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to see Startup Grind back and kicking in the Kansas City area.
You know, I have to admit, when I got here, I was surprised that Startup Grind wasn't, moving. I actually had the opportunity. I've lived in Redwood City, California for 30 years. And my first Startup Grind was in 2019 at their global conference, where they literally shut down downtown Redwood City. And so it was great for me to get that exposure. When I got here, I was like, what do you mean there's no Startup Grind Kansas City?
So here in Kansas City, we're very lucky to have a lot of ESOs and entrepreneurial support kind of scattered throughout the city. So I know that they had Startup Grind a while back. And I think that they tried to revive it again at one point, but nothing really happened. But it's just a matter, there are just so many organizations out there doing awesome work to talk about entrepreneurship. And I think it's because maybe because we have Kaufman right in our very backyard. But
yes.
There's just there's a bountiful landscape, but I've always really loved the Startup Grind brand, heard a lot about it. So I'm excited to see what Startup Grind brings to the landscape.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And I have to admit, I moved here right Super Bowl Sunday, the Chiefs and the Buccaneers. So that was my entrance into Kansas City. And I met you sort of shortly right after that, because I'd started doing some research. And I just loved what InnovateHER KC was doing. And so immediately joined the community and have really super impressed with the community, the work that you're doing. And I'm just really, again, glad you're here so that we can talk about that. And I find it to be an interesting startup because you're doing it a little bit different. So let's start with that, maybe.
I agree, but it's always really interesting to me to talk to people and because I know what I think about InnovateHER KC, but I'm always interested to hear what other people think, get that perspective. So what are we doing different?
Well, I think what I find is well, you know what? Facebook groups are not easy to build. And generally, someone will come out with their minimum viable product, and then they'll go and build their community. And in a way, I sense that you've built this huge community, and that then will take you to your product, to your revenue model, and to that sort of traditional, more startup role, if you will.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective, and I don't necessarily disagree. So our origins, people always come up to me and they're like, InnovateHER KC was such a brilliant idea, such a great idea. So glad you had it. And I'm like, to be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't really an idea. It wasn't really anything when we first started. It just we started as an organization. Well, it wasn't even an organization. It was, at the time I was working for the Kansas City Startup Foundation, which is now called Startland. And I had been their director of operations. I was there for, I don't know, I think about 2.5, 3 years, and, loved my work there. But really, Innovate Her just started as an opportunity for me to, very selfishly, I just wanted to meet women from the entrepreneurial community. I don't think it surprises anybody that in Kansas City and in the world, the startup landscape tends to be pretty white male dominated. And, I had come up through some pretty male dominated industries. My work was in operations and marketing and business development for the industries of automotive, IT. I worked in aerospace for a little while. And so I just always kind of craved woman to woman contact. When you are often the only female manager at a table and you look around and you don't see people who look like you or think like you or act like you, it can be a somewhat alienating experience. And I just, I had some situations that were pretty toxic, and pretty gendered for sure. And I developed this interest in connecting with the women around me. I just wanted to create some touch points. And so Innovator started as a series of events that I put together. They were like little events where we would go for a couple hours. There would be no name tags, no agendas. I was like, hey, I've seen you around. I want to hang out with you. Let's just talk. Let's just connect. The first one, I think we got mani-pedis. We made chocolates at Biz and Wheezy. We went to a ball game. We've seen movies, and so I started putting these events together. And what was really interesting was the kind of the fallout that came from that. The women who went always expressed, oh my gosh, I had such a great time. This was so lovely. Let's do it again. But what was really telling to me is I would have women that I didn't know, had never met, never heard of. They would reach out to me and they would be like, hey, I tracked you down. I heard about what you're doing. I think it sounds awesome. I want to be a part of the next one. Put me on the mailing list. And of course, I'm just like, there's no mailing list. Like this is not a thing. But it happened often enough that I was like, well, okay, maybe there should be a mailing list. So, that is kind of how we started.
Right.
And every move thereafter has been a response to what we have identified from other women, from the women in the community, what we've identified as like a gap or a niche that we can fill. So, I mean, it's been a really interesting journey for sure.
Yeah. And that's what I find is that every time I go into the community to either read about what's going on, there's an opportunity to engage, or if I need something, like I'm currently researching, podcasting equipment, and already I've heard
posted today.
Yeah, and I already have heard from someone, and okay, great. I'm going to be able to do my research now and have some. I do have one of those, but when you look at the kits, they're a little overwhelming. So I'm looking forward to. But that's what I love about this community.
And I was going to respond to you, but I was at the luncheon that I told you about. I was going to tell you, but so I just use laptop. I have a ring light, which you can see right here. So I have a ring light, and I have a microphone, and I have my laptop, and that seems to work pretty well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And those are the things I want to know just to get started. I'm working on a project with someone, and she wants to tell stories. And I said, well, I'll figure this out, and that to me is the beauty of innovators and people that, are part of being an entrepreneur. So let me ask you, was this your first startup with KC Innovate Her?
No. So I've had multiple startups throughout the course of my career. And I always hesitate to use the word startup because startup means a lot of different things to different people. But I think that when most people think of the term startup, they think of that highly scalable, really, really fast growing, technology platform. And I've never done that. And we're, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but like, I'm starting to do that. But through InnovateHER. But when I was in college, I actually, like, how I got into marketing and how I started that portion of my career, I actually started an online webzine. Do you remember zines from like the 90s? Where they were just like these poorly constructed underground newspapers that people would throw together around kind of subversive, edgy topics and stuff. So zines were a thing. And I had a business partner, and we created a zine called, it was a web zine. And that was a relatively new thing. But it was called STL Scene. And so I served as the creative director, and my business partner was kind of like the business director. And so we did that for a couple of years, and we built up a pretty decent following, but we were just reporting and sharing stories on creatives in the St. Louis area, which is where I'm originally from. And so that was my first startup, and that I was able to parlay that. It was really interesting. We grew a following pretty quickly, and it grew. And I was doing things very instinctively. I didn't study marketing. My degree is in English literature, so that's like one of the more useless degrees. But so I started to use social media technology. And this is in the days when, like, it was before Twitter, it was before Instagram, like all of that stuff. It was in the days when they had things like LiveJournal and Zanga and AOL, were like the height of, social media technology. And MySpace was kind of on the back end, just but coming around. And so social media wasn't really a landscape that a lot of people knew about. And so people started to approach me, and they were like, hey, we see that you're using these tools and you're growing your viewership and your audience. What can you help us? And, I did that often enough, gave advice and, talked about how I used different platforms. I did that often enough that I kind of figured out, I was like, well, shouldn't I be making money at this? And that is where V3 Creative was born, which was, I'm aging myself a little bit, but I do have the honor of being one of the, like, on the forefront of social media agencies, in the world. And so that was kind of the start of my entrepreneurial journey. I've always had a side hustle of some kind. Ideative Creative. I still have my marketing agency. I don't do a ton with it because InnovateHER takes up a lot of my time, but I do retain some clients that I do kind of like back end work and stuff like that periodically on a freelance basis. So no, InnovateHER was not my first entrepreneurial endeavor, but it is, I would say, the one that unites all of my passions in my heart.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that you do have a background in, as you said, being one of those sort of forefront leading social media influencers, learning the tools.
Influencers weren't even a thing yet. Like, I didn't even go that far, but I knew how to use tools
and start to spread messages. Yeah. Well, and spread messages, right? So that probably gave you a really good basis for how to get this Facebook community growing.
Yeah.
And one of the things I see out of that is now, like, even myself, when are the memberships coming up, and the engagement that we can have, together. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but
for sure.
I want to talk about sort of what's the number one challenge with your startup or any startup.
I think, for any startup, and the story that I hear time and time again, and, when you consider that this is a woman-owned business, female founders, particularly female founders of color, which that's not part of my journey, but I can definitely empathize. I think access to capital is the hardest thing. We underinvest in women-owned business, and so that has been the sustainability piece, figuring out how to not just make enough money to keep the lights on, but figure out how to make enough money so that we can scale and grow responsibly, so that we can hire people, so that I've had a pretty varied career, and I've been very lucky in that it basically means that I know a little bit about a lot of things. I'm not an expert in anything. That plays really well in startup environments because I generally, even if I don't know something, I know enough to find out what I need to know. And so I can wear a lot of different hats. So that's great for startups. But when you're ready to kind of refine and get really, really good at the things that you're doing, you want to find experts and you want to find specialists, and you want to pay them. And so we've reached a point now where like we're ready. We have this really, really strong, highly engaged community that we've built up. We've built out programming. We've built out, we're really strong in our mission and vision and what we stand for. And so now we kind of reached this precipice moment where it's like, it's time to engage further. It's time to grow. It's time to figure out what's the long-term strategy and put the right people into the right positions.
Right.
Well, you have to pay people to put them in the right positions. And so that's kind of the struggle that we've had. We've been bootstrapping it, thus far, but finding significant capital investment for what we're doing has been a huge struggle for us.
Right. I would think grants might be one way of funding for you because of the work you're doing, in the area that you're in. But again, finding a grant writer, going after those grants, those are some of the challenges. And I hear you because I sit here myself. Funding is really the number one thing when it comes to businesses, especially for women. And yet there's a statistic out there that women return 78 cents on the dollar compared to men returning 35 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Women are a better investment, and yet they only get like less than 10% of the funding. It's ridiculous.
So female founders receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. Women of color receive, I think it's like 0.068%, or so. I can't remember the exact number, but it's just this dismal number. When we're talking about venture capital funding, but I mean the numbers are egregiously outscaled and outmatched, even when you're looking at bank loans, when you're looking at at alternative forms of capital. Women and minority founders are still super underinvested in, and it's really, really frustrating because so women, and in particular women of color, they're the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in our country, and they do tend to outperform their male-owned peers. And so that's one of the issues that Innovator, we're seeking to address. Like, how do we help women leaders? And we approach our work in an industry agnostic way. So not all of our members are entrepreneurs, but a large segment of our members are entrepreneurs. But how do we help these women get in front of people who can fund them, who can support them, who can buy their product, who get, that's a big part of what we do. One of our pillars is championship, amplification of work. How do we get the message out there?
Right.
So yeah, it's a very, very weird, conflicted societal ill that for whatever reason we don't invest in our women.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And, that to me is an easy fix as well, right? So it's having conversations, showing people the data and getting them to understand, and, finding that one person that's going to take that chance and say yes, or that one bank. I'm a little hopeful with the new administration and the Small Business Administration that they start to look at those things in terms of removing the barriers to funding for any small business that wants to get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about when you're faced with these challenges. Do you engage with your team? Do you engage with your community? Do you figure it out yourself? How do you bring that challenge to sort of a solution?
So
you pointed out earlier, you kind of do everything yourself, right?
Yeah. So as of right now, I would say that probably about 95% of InnovateHER KC is me. And that's not, I firmly believe that I should not be making decisions in a vacuum, because I do not represent all women and I have no interest in representing all women.
Right.
But that being said, so we built up a leadership team, and they served as a sounding board. Sometimes they would help me out with projects and stuff like that. And then the pandemic actually just kind of decimated them. Like, I felt super uncomfortable as a leader saying, hey, I can't pay you. And I know that you're trying to keep your own business afloat and you're trying to homeschool your kids because school is no longer a thing, apparently.
Yeah.
I know that you have all of these things going on in your life, but I feel uncomfortable asking you for help and adding more to your plate. You feel like you're just drowning because of everything that's happening. And so our leadership team was kind of decimated. I would say that one of my, full transparency, one of my big struggles as a leader has been, particularly in that regard, has been I'm a little bit of a control freak. Like that much, a little bit. And so I do have a difficult time stepping back and saying, hey, because Innovator is my baby and nobody knows it better than me. Nobody. Right. And so the mantra that I have adopted over the course of the past couple of years is, just because it's not your way doesn't mean it's a bad way. And that's kind of what I have to tell myself when it comes time to tap someone else to handle something,
that is great, because for me, I actually had someone say to me, do you know where your strengths are? Do you know what you're really good at? And I said, well, yes, absolutely. And then you know what your weaknesses are. And I said, yes, I do. Then delegate those.
Yeah.
Oh, what a genius idea, right? Because I can concentrate on the things that I'm really good at, and then know that someone else is doing what they're really good at. And so I love that, just because it's not my idea, right?
Yeah. It's definitely been a journey. And the good thing about me, I'm pretty self-aware. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And I'll be completely transparent with my team. We're building our leadership team back up now, and we've brought on some rock stars to kind of help out and lift the load. And these are expert women who know, they're brilliant. They know, of course they know better than I do in their area of expertise. That's by design. But I've been very transparent with them. I'm like, here's the deal. I am fun to work with. I most days, sometimes I get a little snippy when I get stressed out, but I'll always apologize. But in general, I am going to be your biggest cheerleader. I'm going to be your biggest helpmeet and running mate and co-conspirator, and we're going to work together and it's going to be amazing. I am not always great at bringing people along with me. I move fast. I think fast. I have to make decisions quickly. And so that, and so I've empowered the team. I'm just like, hey, feel free to call me out. If you see me running too far afield and too far ahead, I promise not to get mad. I'm not going to, resent you for doing it, but just be like, hey, Lauren, you might want to involve us a little bit, and I will always do it.
Well, and that's the sign of a good leader, recognizing when, I need to be called out or I need to be brought back. And that's what your team is for, right? So it's good to have them to help you be that sounding board, or to remind you, we have a few more steps to go before we get there.
For sure. Right? Well, and I've gotten better. I will never be perfect. I don't ask perfection of myself. I don't ask perfection of anybody else around me. That's been a piece of the journey too, coming to the realization that, you have to be at least as kind to yourself as you are to other people.
Yes.
And so figuring that out, it took a minute, but I'm there. I'm never going to be perfect, but I can always keep striving for better.
And I think, I have a colleague that likes to say, not best practices, but better practices. Yeah. Because we can always get better, right? Yeah. Exactly. So what's the number one reward with all of this with InnovateHER KC?
Oh, man. Honestly, it is truly awe-inspiring to me. Just looking at this community of women that has been built. And I noticed that I say that, I didn't say I have built, because I didn't build it. I steward it. But a lot of it comes from the innovators themselves. We rule by the law. Right. We don't recruit actively. On rare occasion, I might like come in and be like, hey, don't forget to like invite a friend. But I mean, that happens like what, once a year. Other than that, like we don't really recruit. We draw people to us, like our members. They invite other women, they invite their friends, they invite their family, and that's a huge compliment to me and to the organization, because you don't invite people to share in things unless you find value in them, right?
Right.
So I always find that just absolutely, it's such an honor. And I'm very proud. People are always like, what are you proud of with Innovator? And I'm like, well, the thing that I'm most proud of is the thing that I have the least to do with. But we have created together this community of absolute badasses, amazing, passionate, smart, funny, committed, hardworking women leaders.
All of the above, absolutely.
And they support each other, and we laugh, and we have a good time. And sometimes we talk about like really hard topics. We have difficult discussions. We get together and we, contribute to each other's fundraisers, and we just do all of these things. And there's this community out there that I get to be a part of, and I get to steward on a day-to-day basis. And it's an honor and it's a privilege. And I'm very, very, very grateful for the opportunity.
You have really built a great model of diversity, equity, inclusion, or you're fostering it, right? Because there's great diversity in there. There's obviously inclusion and discussion, and it's a very open, equitable environment. I mean, I'm envious, and I think that other entrepreneurs should look at this model and realize, wow, the engagement that they have, not only with just you as the InnovateHER, but with each other. That to me is the magic ingredient to the soup, if you will.
I'd prefer it if I lifted right out. Like I love to watch it, and I love to be a part of it for sure. But I get really excited whenever I see the connections happening that I have nothing to do with, independently of me, because that to me, like, that's the system working. Like, when I created the first Facebook group, Startup Sheroes, that's what we were originally called. All right, but it's a part of our history.
Right.
When we created it, I didn't really know what to expect. I really just wanted to create an environment in which women in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Kansas City could connect with each other in a very real way. And what has, like, sometimes it actually happened faster than I was ready for, which was really like a really interesting part of the process. Like, oh God, now I have to catch up to where this thing is going, and we've always tried to remain really responsive to community need and what the community is saying and what they want. But there have been a couple of times where like things have just kind of started to accelerate, and I'm like, I wasn't quite prepared for this, but I remember, and this was pretty early on in our trajectory, but we had a week. Actually, it was 3 days. We had a 3-day period where we went from 400 members to 600 members, and I have no idea what precipitated that, but like all of a sudden we took on 200 new members over the course of 3 days, and that was the first time I sat down and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to quit my job. And that was like, because I in my head, like that had become a possibility,
right?
Like it had flitted across my mind, but I had never seen that accelerated rate of growth. And I was like, so this is what is happening with 10% of my attention. At the time I still had a full-time job. I was,
there was a lot going on.
My partner, I was living life, and the InnovateHER was just kind of this thing that I was doing as a side project. And then this happened, and all of a sudden it was like, imagine what could happen, what we could do, and how we could impact women leaders. Imagine what we could do if I was putting 100% of my attention on it. And like that was kind of the crystallizing moment where I was like, oh God, like so there have been several points in this journey along this path where like things have happened, and I'm just like, I was not prepared at all for this, but I'm going to get prepared real quick.
Yeah, well, and to me, one of the things that it says is the strength
Yeah.
of innovation and entrepreneurs in Kansas City, right?
Sure.
When I first got here, I did my research, and it's always entrepreneurial focus.
For sure.
Sprint, Cerna, some of the other startup companies that have, been here and are long-term, groups. But this one being so focused on women, I'm just astounded, right? That I think there's over 4,000 women now in the group, 4,000 members.
Last time I checked, which granted, I think was sometime last week, we had 4,335 members. That number changes every day. And so I mean,
yeah.
If I had to hazard a guess, I would imagine that we're probably somewhere around 4,050 would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, that's just amazing.
I don't actually track that metric too hard. People are always surprised. They're like, how many members do you have? And I'm like, I can give you an ish. I check in maybe once a week. But that's not the most important metric to me. I mean, it's a very interesting data point for sure. And so I do follow it, but I don't follow it religiously. The number that I actually care about is our engagement level. Because there are a ton of there are a ton of like online virtual communities out there where, you've got like 10,000 members, but how many people are posting? How many people are contributing? How many people care about, they're not just some passive member. And the number that I actually look at really hard is our engagement. And that's the one that I'm just like, we're doing well, because we tend to see our average engagement level is like 85 to 95% month over month. So that means that 85 to 95% of that 4,300 plus members are seeing, interacting with, acknowledging content, adding content, participating. And that's the number that continues to astound me, because when you benchmark against other virtual communities, the kind of standard for peer organizations or communities like ours is right around 50%, and that's a gold standard. That's a number that people shoot for. And so the fact that we consistently month over month blow right past that, and usually we're right around like 93-94% engagement, that's more than a data point. That is an indication to me that our members, they find value in what we're doing, and they want to be a part of it.
Absolutely. It's so funny that you bring that up, because that was actually the next part of the conversation I wanted to go into is, how do you measure success? So we just talked about that. And it's around your community engagement, which kind of leads into the next thing. One of the things that I love about your group is that I'm not overwhelmed with content. I mean, yes, people are posting every day, but when it comes to Innovate Her and your social media strategy, it's not like every single day, all the time. There's a nice, what I would say, I think I said to you on the phone the other day, there's a strategic plan behind it, because I want to be engaged because I'm not overwhelmed. I mean, I get stuff every day. I get an email from, hey, we've got stuff on this page, and I half time ignore it, where I don't even get notifications for your page, and I show up and I read and I engage and I check. Because it's a strong community and I know they're engaged. So I love that number of 92% a month. It's interesting. That's the number you tag.
Yeah. And I actually, I think it's kind of funny that you say that you like that you're not overwhelmed by content. Like one of my big frustrations, and again, because we didn't start out as this organization, like this is not what we thought we would, or what I thought we would be doing. Like if you had asked me, when we started InnovateHER KC, like, hey, can you believe that in 2 years you're going to have this many members and you're going to be doing this and this and this and this? Like I would have just laughed. I would have been like, I don't have time for that. Like, nobody's got time for that.
Yeah.
So the fact that it has kind of grown beyond even my own comprehension at times has been really interesting. But one of the frustrations that comes with that is the fact that like we started on Facebook because I wasn't thinking this would be a thing. I wasn't thinking about long-term growth. I wasn't thinking about, sustainability. I wasn't thinking about, well, what about people who aren't on Facebook? I didn't care about engaging people who weren't on Facebook because this was literally just Lauren wants to hang out with cool entrepreneurial women,
Right.
So that was not a part of my thought
initial thought. Yeah.
And so we started out on Facebook and then we continued to grow, but now we've reached a point where we are completely at the mercy of the Facebook algorithm. And we're completely, so for instance, because our virtual community lives on Facebook, like I don't have the emails for a lot of our members because Facebook doesn't give you that information even when you administrate a group. And so we are
interesting.
Yeah. And so like we can reach people through our social media channels, and our social media reach is actually great. But I still have people who come to me, like I think I posted, this was a couple months back, where I posted about one of our coffees. I posted a picture from one of our virtual coffee events. We have one every month,
right,
for our members to connect. And I posted a picture and I had like 3 people come to me and be like, I didn't even know that you did that. And I was like, we post about them on a pretty regular basis. Like we don't post about them all the time, but we post about them regularly for sure. So the fact that you are not seeing this information, that's been a big business problem for us. And so when we talk about, like you had mentioned, paid memberships, and when we talk about some of the tools that we are building, one of the business problems that we're hoping to solve is how do we stay in consistent contact with our members? So it's really interesting that you're kind of coming at it from the opposite view, and you're like, it's cool. Like, I'm really glad that I'm not overwhelmed or inundated with information, because we don't want to do that either.
Right. Well, and to your point, being able to connect with them outside of Facebook, that's where your sales and marketing and your website and all that other stuff would come in. One of the things that I hear all the time, because they're all over Facebook and LinkedIn, but building your email list.
Right. Well, and I mean, we do actually have like a pretty robust newsletter list, but there's actually not a lot of intersection between members of the virtual community and our Facebook email list, like, our newsletter email list. Like the people who found our newsletter came to our website because they heard about us and thought we were interesting. And so then they, click to sign up for the newsletter, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they then come to the virtual community and join.
Right. Well, imagine if those two groups came together, you'd have a solid list, right?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, and so the other thing that we've been trying, we consistently try to find workarounds. So like just as a, for instance, we don't charge for membership. One of our foundational ethics is low barrier to entry. That is hugely important to me as an individual. Right. It's the foundation of why we exist. And so, we don't we don't have membership fees or dues or anything like that currently. You just join the Facebook community and congrats, you're an innovator. Yay. And it's really that easy.
Yeah.
But you ask a couple of questions, like, do you agree to the community rules?
Right.
I think one of the questions is, how are you enacting radical, we talk about radical positive change. How are you enacting radical positive change as a woman leader in Kansas City? And what's heartbreaking to me is when people are like, I'm not, but I'd like to. And I'm like, you are. You just don't know how yet.
Yeah, just turn it around.
But yeah, and like, I'm just like, we need to have a little bit of a conversation because you're a rock star. But one of the questions that we've started asking is, we ask for your email address. Like, we're not going to spam you, but we have reached a point where like we have to be able to get in contact with our members if we need to get in contact with our members. And I mean, to our knowledge, like I don't add them to our email list or anything like that, but it's just kind of a safety security blanket for me. Like, okay, we have these emails in our back pocket. Like, should we really need to,
Well, when you're ready to launch something, right? I would, send them out, and they every single website now, in your email CRM tools, whatever you're using, always at the bottom has that disclaimer and allows people to unsubscribe if they want to, right? So
yeah, well, and so like something else that we've done is in each newsletter and also like periodically in the community, we've made the offer like, look, some of you have talked about the fact that you're missing our happy hours and coffees because you don't see stuff. That's cool. If you send me your email right now, I will put you on a calendar invite for it, and I promise I will not email you about anything else. But if you want to be at our happy hours and coffees, let's put it on your calendar.
yeah,
You know, our happy hours and coffee attendance has like shot up because we have made it super easy for people to say, oh, hey, you know, the Innovator coffee is coming up first Tuesday of the month. I need to leave that space free on my calendar. And so I think we currently have over 100 people on this damn calendar invite just because people were like, yes, I want to see your happy hours and coffees. And I haven't been seeing them when you post them.
Well, and for me, you know, the darn LinkedIn algorithm, sometimes I don't see things until, you know, it's been up for a day or 2 days.
Right.
And then I'm thinking, oh, I already have a meeting. Oh, darn, I can't. So it's a little frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're trying to come up with workarounds. We'll figure it out. But one of these days, we're going to be releasing our proprietary tool to help us manage that. So
there you go. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing, you know, alone from funding, but as you're transitioning into this revenue model and scaling? You know, I'm sure there's other things besides the funding, but are you, you know, is it the processes? I always hear about HR issues and I laugh, culture.
Yeah,
you know, you probably don't have that yet.
Issues. Like it would be unless it's like me talking to me like, hey Lauren, quit being such a jerk. Okay. You know, that's the extent of our HR department.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, we've definitely had some growing pains and struggles. I think one of the significant struggles that we had early on, and we still see it periodically, and it's one of those things where I don't know if it's ever going to be eradicated, but we kind of one of the things that was really important to me when I was kind of figuring out like I wanted to figure out and have a really strong answer to why we exist, because there are a lot of women's networking organizations out there, professional organizations, like whatever you want to call them, associations. There are a bunch out there. And so I was like, how are we different? Because I'm a huge proponent or a huge cheerleader. Like I don't want to duplicate work. Like I want to amplify and cheerlead what's already out there. And so we had to find our differentiator, because otherwise, like, why don't we just go ahead and pick somebody who's already doing something and just, you know, share what they're doing. But so pretty early on, I determined that we were going to have two differentiators that were going to be like, this is why we exist. This is what we breathe. This is what we live and we die for. And those two things are low barrier to entry. I've already talked about that.
Yep.
You know, there are a lot of professional associations out there, but there's always a price tag attached. And, you know, sometimes women, they look at these organizations and they can't afford it. They can't commit to driving all over the city. Like if you're a single mom, you know, and you have a kid, that's a barrier too. Like finding childcare, you know, gas money. So we really wanted to try to make it as easy as we could for as many women to, like, if you are female, if you're a woman, transgender woman, or non-binary femme leader, you belong to a marginalized gender, like you identify as a leader or you want to activate as a leader, like, and you're kind of in the Kansas City area, cool, come on, join.
Right.
Super easy. You know, so that was number one. Number two, though, was inclusion. And, you know, because I looked around, and I mean, it started with a kernel of truth in my head. Like there are some professional women's organizations out there that, like, I walk into the room and, you know, I'm tatted up and I'm pierced and, you know, half Jewish, half gay, little fat, you know, like all of these things. And I would look around the room and I was like, I don't fit here. And it's not that, like, you know, this room is lovely. These women are lovely, but this is not my vibe. And so I wanted to create, very selfishly, a space where I felt comfortable
and seen
and seen.
Yeah.
And then over the course of time, and like through some education and through some very, very, very smart women who were willing to share their wisdom with me, that kind of transcended that awareness that maybe not all women fit in all spaces and places. That awareness then became about, well, what about women of color? What about LGBTQ plus women? What about transgender women? What about non-binary femme women? Sorry, not women, non-binary femmes, or like non-binary individuals who feel comfortable in femme places. What about all of these people who don't necessarily have a place for them? Can we become a catch-all? Can we become a place that appeals to all walks of people, all walks of leaders? And so that was the question that I wanted to try to answer. But this is a double-edged sword, because somebody very, very smart said to me pretty early on, and we were actually going through like a bit of a rough patch. Somebody very, very smart once said to me that you cannot create an environment where all voices are valued equally, while at the same time creating an environment where everyone feels safe. And so I needed to unpack that, but the struggle, there's often like even internally within the group and amongst the leadership team, these are the kinds of conversations that we have. But like, what if somebody comes in and says, "Go Trump 2024"? There is a large swath of the innovator population that would feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable, because they are, they're Hispanic, Latinx, like whatever they are. I don't know. I mean, who
they don't fall into the white male patriarchy.
Like, what other like groups did Trump terrorize?
Right.
So you have this environment where it sounds really great to say that, oh yeah, everybody deserves to be heard, but you have to understand that there's a give and take. And so within our community, we get really, really strong on, you will not say things that make members of our community feel safe, or you're not welcome here. And so finding that balance where like we don't espouse a particular political ideology for sure, but we don't allow bullies. And we don't allow, statements that will make people feel
uncomfortable and unwanted.
Make them feel, And so finding that, and like I said, we often have difficult conversations within the innovator community, and people have, like, they'll come up to me and they'll be like, well, aren't you going to do anything about this? And I'm like, no, I'm not. This is an important conversation to have. Like, I monitor them extremely carefully.
Right.
The first time I see like a slur, the first time I see an attack, the first time I see, but we have this, like, it's really interesting. And this is like a societal level thing. There are so many people out there who believe that disagreement, dissent is the same thing as bullying or the same thing as victimization. And that's simply not true.
Right.
And so like, the first time I see somebody call a name or, denigrate someone's lived experience, bye, you're gone.
Right.
But I mean,
but to have, but to have difficult conversations, I mean, in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, right? You create the safe space to have the difficult conversation and allow the voices to be heard, but you facilitate that, you stay on top of it, and you don't allow people, to your point, right? But that is what's going to help you build a really solid culture. And you've done that with InnovateHER KC.
We've tried.
In my year and a half, in the year and a half that I have been a member of the group, I think there was one instance. And what I found is, to your point, you don't have to step in, Lauren, because the culture of the community stepped in. And they took care of it, right? And then they respond. And so I
do always step in. But
I found that the community is as supportive as well.
Well, we've created a community of women who they might not always agree, because I would never ask that all of our members agree all the time. And I would never ask that, like, we have zero interest in tone policing. Like, if you want to passionately state what you want to state, if you want to use cuss words, I don't care. I use cuss words. You know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, like, I want you to communicate in a way that feels authentic to you. The moment that stops is when you turn that on someone specific in an attacking manner. And so that's the line that I look for. But other than that, we're pretty like, hey, you know, if somebody sounds upset, maybe they're upset, and that's okay.
Right.
You know, we don't have to be comfortable all the time. Like, in fact, because of the state of our country and where we are and how we treat, you know, minorities and women of color, and how we treat people and women. And this is the thing that gets me. Like, we don't treat women particularly well either. You know, look at that. Like, yeah, people are like, you're an angry feminist. And I'm like, yes, both of those things are true. You know, I can sit
it's okay.
Yeah, like, I can have a conversation with you. I can be perfectly civil. We can, you know, debate. We can go back and forth. I'm not going to call you names. People get really scared that I'm going to, like, cancel them because of the work. And I'm like, I very rarely care about you enough to cancel you, which I know sounds terrible, but I'm just like, that's not what I want to do.
That's not what we want to do either. You know, we always tell people it's counseling, not canceling.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
to educate people.
Like, let's have the conversation. And the fact is, we're probably not going to come to agreement, but at least let's, you know, share our perspectives.
Yeah.
But that is a really difficult line for people to understand. Like, I think that discomfort is, I don't love it because it's uncomfortable, but it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I should be angry.
Exactly. And, you know, the fact that you've created this environment where women of all, you know, personalities, identifications, orientations can come together and be supportive. You know, so for myself, I just love it. We're coming up on time. I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation. We lost a few of our attendees, but, you know, I'm going to be posting this on YouTube, and then just to share with the community, sort of upcoming.
Yeah.
I have another session. The life sciences, where you find the diamonds in the rough. This is a very old colleague of mine. We work together at Inhale. And he actually just got himself and his organization funding for his first clinical study. So a startup in the pharmaceutical environment. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's on July 15th. So Lauren Conaway, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful. And I cannot wait to talk to you again out in the community and
out in the world.
Out in the world, and see each other in person. I know it's coming soon. So looking forward to that very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Startup Grind watchers and listeners, for taking the time. Definitely, if you identified with any of the things that we talked about and you're a woman leader in the Kansas City area, think about joining InnovateHER KC. Also, one of the ways that we amplify our members is we tell their stories on the Startup Hustle podcast. So definitely give that a listen. One of the more fun parts of my job and why I have this fancy microphone set up. But yeah, definitely connect. I love connecting with people.
Very cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lauren, and have a great afternoon.
You too, friends.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Bye.